So the new iPhone is finally here, and much like the Galaxy S24 and the previous iPhone, it's an evolution with a few new tricks up its sleeve. So in this video, we're going to compare the iPhone 16 with the Galaxy S24. Now, like all our comparisons, this will be divided into 5 sections. So we'll talk about the displays, the specs, the cameras, the build, and ultimately help you decide which one's the best for you. So let's kick things off with the displays, as there's quite a lot to unfold here. And right off the bat, the iPhone 16 has the same display as the iPhone 15. So you still have that same 6.1-inch Super Retina XDR display with a high resolution and a pixel density of 460. So it's kept all the good aspects, but it's also kept the same 60Hz refresh rate, which I really hoped it hadn't. And I'll get to it in a second. Now moving on to the Galaxy S24, you have a 6.2-inch AMOLED display with a resolution of 2340 by 1080, giving you a pixel density of 416, and the S24 does have a higher refresh rate at 120 Hz. Now, we didn't anticipate that Apple will put the ProMotion display in the base iPhone, and I do understand the argument that not everyone is going to notice a difference between a 120 Hz and a 60 Hz display, but I feel this is something that's held back the iPhone all these years, and it's a chink in the armor, especially when you look at a spec sheet. That's the first thing you notice is the lower refresh rate. So hopefully next year's iPhone has a ProMotion display, because at this price point, it should. But apart from that, it's a really solid display. It's actually got a higher refresh rate and pixel density than the S24. But the Samsung panels tend to have a bit more saturation and vividness, which gives the impression of a better display. But honestly, Apple has caught up with them these last few years, and they now just need to fix that issue with the low refresh rate on the base iPhone. Now moving on, let's talk about the specs. So the iPhone 16 has Apple's new A18 chip with the Apple GPU and a 6-core CPU, whereas the Galaxy S24 either has the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 or the Exynos 2400 depending on where you are in the world. It has the Adreno 750 GPU and an octa-core processor. Now both the phones have 8 gigs of RAM and the same storage capacity, starting at 128 and going all the way up to 512. So unfortunately neither of them are expandable. This year the iPhone has a bigger battery at 3561 mAh compared to the massive 4000 on the S24. Both the phones are IP68 water and dust resistant, and this year Apple has decided to jump 2 generations of chips. So they've gone from the A16 Bionic in the iPhone 15 to the new A18 in the iPhone 16. Now the S24 on the other hand comes in 2 different type of chipsets depending on where you are. So if you are in US, Canada or China, you get the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3. But if you are anywhere else in the world, you get the Exynos 2400. And on paper, the Gen 3 is a bit more efficient and does outscore the Exynos 2400, so that is something you have to keep in mind. But again, the difference isn't as high as you would expect in daily use and in basically everyday use. Now, Apple chips are really good at extracting a lot of battery life and performance out of the phone, which is really good considering both the phones are running AI features on board, and it's good to have as much battery life, RAM, and processing power as you can. Now moving on, let's talk about what everyone's been waiting for, the cameras. And there's something really interesting going on with the iPhone 16, so I'll get to that in just 1 second. But the S24 on the other hand has 3 lenses, a 50 megapixel wide sensor, a 12 megapixel ultra wide, and a 10 megapixel telephoto. So you have 3 physical lenses and 3 different kinds of cameras out of them, or 3 different kind of images that you can get out of those cameras. The iPhone 16 on the other hand has 2 physical lenses. So you have a 48 megapixel wide sensor and a 12 megapixel ultra wide sensor. Now when I said there was something interesting going on with the iPhone's camera, I did actually mean it. Because even though you have 2 physical lenses, Apple is pitching this as 4 different kind of images or 4 different kind of cameras that your iPhone has. So the main sensor, which is a 48 megapixel sensor, can generate a 12 megapixel telephoto cropped in image, and the 12 megapixel ultra wide sensor can produce macro photography. So even though the 2 lenses can accommodate and generate 4 kinds of images, it's not 4 physical cameras. So you have to keep that in mind, and again, it's clever marketing, and again, it props to the 2 cameras for doing all the hard work on that. but I feel it's just image processing at its finest. Now moving on to video, the S24 can do 8K up to 30 frames, whereas the iPhone's limited to 4K up to 60, even though based on resolution the iPhone should be able to do 8K video, they've just capped it at 4K. With slow motion, both phones can do 1080 up to 240 frames, and the S24 on the other hand has HDR10 plus. So the iPhone 16 itself doesn't come with log or the ProRes video, which the Pro models do, but you do have cinematic mode and the action mode, which does give you a really great video. And overall, I feel in terms of images, there's not that much of a difference. It really is personal preference again, because Samsung images tend to be saturated. Whereas the video, I feel that's where the difference really lies, and iPhones have been really amazing when it comes to videos for quite some time now, and they are still a bit ahead the competition. Now up the front, they both have a 12 megapixel camera, and they both can do 4K up to 60 frames per second. The iPhone does have one new thing though. It's a new capacitive dedicated camera button, which allows you to both launch the camera app and take pictures and videos with it. And there's a whole lot of customization. You can change the exposure with it, you can change the zoom. So it's really great to see that the iPhone finally has a dedicated button for the camera. Now moving on to build, Samsung went the Apple way with the S24. So you have squared off edges, a flat back, a flat front. The phone does feel a bit nicer to hold and comes in onyx black, marble gray, cobalt violet, and amber yellow. And there are some other Samsung exclusive colors available online. And it starts at $799. The iPhone 16 on the other hand, even though the form factor is more or less the same, you now have a different orientation for the cameras to allow spatial imaging and video, which again is a welcome change, and I much prefer this over the orientation we had with the iPhone 15. The iPhone 16 now comes in ultramarine, teal, black, white, and pink, and also starts at $799 for the base 128 gig storage model. But which one should you buy? Now, I believe there are two different aspects when making that decision. The first one being upgrading within the same ecosystem, and then the second one being moving across to a different ecosystem. Now, as for the first one, I feel the year-on-year development and improvement in smartphones isn't as radical as it used to be. So the jump from iPhone 15 to an iPhone 16 or from the S23 to the S24 wouldn't be as radical or as high as you might think, which is a good thing because manufacturers are basically refining and improving what already is a good smartphone and fixing what needs fixing and retaining what needs to be kept. And that's the case with these two as well. But if you're coming from anything prior to that, maybe an iPhone 12 or 13 or an S21 or S22, then these two definitely have enough performance gain and enough refinements to consider upgrading, and they are the best in line or best in their individual class to upgrade. Now, as for the second aspect, if you are coming from Android to iOS or considering the switch from iOS to Android, then again it comes down to the ecosystem you're in, as they gel really well within their own ecosystem. Now, a point of concern for most Android users is that there's not a lot of customization within iOS, and iOS 18 does address that to an extent, and you can customize the way the home screen looks and the way the lock screen looks, but it still isn't as versatile as Android. And if you're an iOS user who's looking for more versatility and you're looking for that switch, then there's no better phone to get into Android than the S24. It's a complete package, and for that price, you cannot go wrong with the S24. However, if you're coming from Android or Samsung to iOS, or if it's your first ever iPhone, then the iPhone 16 will be the best introduction to Apple and to iOS. So that is pretty much it. I hope this helps you guys make a decision and to stay informed. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and stay tuned for more. Until then, peace.